Yes, I think we are live, and thank you so much for joining us. We are discussing Belarus today, and we have here distinguished speakers. But I'd like to tell a bit more about our series of virtual events. We are a digital communication network, and this event is organized with in collaboration with DC and Southeast Europe Hub, with the support of World Learning and also of Office of Educational and Cultural Affairs exchanges of State Department. So let me emphasize that all the views and opinions expressed today during the webinar reflect the views only of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the organization sponsoring the event. And and today we have very exciting topic on one hand, but also very complex on the other hand. We are live on YouTube and on Facebook right now, so please feel free to share with your colleagues and friends the link. I will try to share the link itself in the chat. So why we talk about Belarus right now? In a very short time, Belarus will have another elections, but these are not regular elections. This is something bigger, something really different from previous campaigns. Let me share the screen to show some background of the situation. So basically, we have, as you all know, we have Alexander Lukashenko, 26 years in power. So for this time, he managed to consolidate the whole regime in his own hands. Generations of officials have changed since 1994. During his rule, he basically destroyed and eliminated the division of power. He managed to build full control over local regional administrations, police, law enforcement, and the army. And today there was his address to the nation. 2,500 people attended this address. No one was in the mask except foreign ambassadors present in the room. And I must say that not many of these guys were happy, and it didn't seem like that was the gathering of the winning candidate, the one who is sure in his success in 4 days. He was challenged by different opposition candidates, and this campaign was the first when he was challenged by people from former representatives of elite, and those who can be referred as the business, like Viktor Babarika. So these people were not involved in politics before. Valery Tsapkala, who was not also registered, used to be the member of Lukashenko's team in 1994 and later on, and left his team, let's say, in 2017. So Lukashenko is surrounded by not just by traditional opposition representatives, but also by people who, let's say, belong to his family somehow. He mentioned today something like, all these children, I raised them with my own hands and from my own breast. So I think he was mentioning not just the real kids, but primarily the guys, politicians who left him. He did register 5 candidates. He did not expect that this campaign will be extraordinary. He tried to eliminate this possibility of unification of the opposition. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the one of registered candidates, the wife of Sergei Tikhanovsky, YouTube blogger, is running now as the candidate of the unified opposition headquarters. So people expressed their mobilization from the very beginning, the big gatherings in Minsk and regions, which is quite new for Belarus. They were waiting in lines and queues to sign in support of opposition candidates. So the queue itself became the symbol of protest. And this protests started in May, and they didn't stop since then. As you can see, that the people who are supporting the opposition right now, they are not just regular activists or journalists. There are young people, older people, even those who were working for Lukashenko before. Government reacted quite harshly. Most of these protests were stopped, not from the very beginning, but after some after government see that the protest does not disperse, does not disappear by itself, they try to detain people, to scare people, to frighten people, and more protests, more violence we can see. But also we see not just violence, we also see the creativity of people, and we also see that people began helping each other and began protecting each other from the police and from KGB. Moreover, besides repressions and attacks on activists joining the rallies and meetings in support of opposition candidates, we see the attacks on the opposition. We see journalists targetedly followed by the police, by KGB, by security service of Lukashenko, we don't know, and arrested during live streams. And as we can expect, as we can think, the monitoring of journalists is organized separately, especially to eliminate possible coverage of the rally. So what they want, it seems what they want to have these elections in the full darkness. This is why Belarus did not invite foreign observers. This is why local observers are limited at the voting station, and almost no opposition independent observers there. People defend themselves, and each new rally, each new month, each new week, more and more people. So we can say that this rally was the biggest since 90th, the biggest in 21st century. From as we heard from human rights organizations, more than 60,000 people joined the rally last week in Minsk, in the park, in outskirts, not in the center, definitely. And the government is trying to prevent the new rallies and new concerts, new gatherings like this, because they see how people mobilize. Not only Minsk, but also Brest, Grodno, Gomel, Mohyliv. Each city gathered unprecedented number of protesters. And here you can see how Belarus partisans are coming out of forests, our fortress, and Brest was extraordinary. More than 17,000 people joined that rally, and it's hard to say what was the first, the candidates or the protesters, and who set up the tone, who set up the narrative, who set up the slogan. Most of the production of the content, of the branding, is made on the grassroots level. It appears first on YouTube channels, in chats. This is why, also on Telegram, this is why Lukashenko mentioned today Telegram 4 or 5 times. I think, he doesn't know what is Telegram, but, he dreams in his nightmares, about this crazy Telegram, which creates so much trouble to him. People really connect there. People really can share information, can share insights with journalists without being persecuted after. We have more than 30 political prisoners, but many of them are still waiting for recognition by human rights defenders. And we have more than 1,400 detainees since the beginning of campaign. Many of them are activists, but many of them are journalists, bloggers, YouTubers, Telegram channel administrators. So this campaign is targeting those who spread information, primarily who spread news, who spread the free word, an alternative to government opinion. The first time in the history, perhaps, such solidarity worldwide with Belarus is happening. So more than 50 countries, and here where we have Natalia Kaliada, who is a big ambassador of Belarus worldwide with the Belarus Free Theater and other initiatives. But Belarus diaspora amazingly coordinated this campaign through Facebook primarily, and managed to organize rallies in support of the changes, not in support of the specific candidate, in the United States, Canada, France, Spain, Portugal, even Indonesia, Australia. So Belarusians really awakened. Creativity, that will be my last part for the introduction. So people, these people in Belarus are amazing in terms of creativity, and any tough regime, any hard time, given us a lot of arts, a lot of cool things. They inspire those who are looking for inspiration. And on social media today, for example, thousands played the bingo game. Lukashenko addressed the nation, and people were sending the words he used. And it seems that Lukashenko basically used all the words he's using basically for 26 years. So we have winners of this bingo game. To the BY portal organized, um, they are not able to organize polls about presidential candidates. In Belarus, exit polls and public opinion polls and pre-election polls are prohibited. So Belarus portal Tudbay asked the people, what movie would you like the most? The Soul Man with Tom Ford, Three Women by Robert Altman, Anna, Che, and basically all these names refer to the candidates. And people were offered basically, in fact, to vote not for films, but for candidates. But Tudbay just found the way to avoid censorship and limitations. Bicycle riders, they don't write against Lukashenko, they don't organize rallies and meetings, they just write together at the same time. And for almost 2 weeks, they ride it without problems, without being detained by police, but it stopped. But I think police was so scared with this, and Lukashenko was so angry with these bikers, who destroy the stability of Belarus. So now the bikers is equal terrorist, almost in Belarus, and many new names, young artists of Belarus, even those who are from state schools, who are often on TV, they anonymously share their art about the situation. So this one is about Belarus freedom. So the woman ahead of the crowd is freedom, and she's like she's leading the nation. And a lot of and this free trio is another artistic inspirational element, which inspired not just artists but also bloggers, and also propagandists, to joke about. But even if it would be, it's impossible to plan. Even it's impossible to plan artificially. That the three women became the leader in very patriarchal and very conservative society, and then the women itself that became the major leader, the major motors, I would say, of the protest, not just in Minsk, but in the whole country. Yeah, so I will stop here. That's for introduction, and let me introduce the speakers today. Finally. So, but very briefly, I hope speakers will speak about themselves later as well. So we have here David Marples from Canada, professor who wrote, I think, most of the books that exist in English language about Belarus. And David Marples is personally to me the inspiration. How you can be so far away and so close at the same time, and be so deeply involved in the processes in the country where no hope exists anymore, something like this. And sometimes you read him and you understand, that, oh my God, it's not so bad in Belarus, and we really are so special. We have here Vitis Jurkonis from Lithuania. Vitis is from Freedom House. He works with many Belarus projects, and he's one of the best specialists in Belarus politics. And I think he witnessed many election campaign in the country, so he can be a bit skeptical, but which is fair. We have Irena Lasota. Irena is an expert in all post-Soviet pro-democracy movement. Irena used to be the symbol of democracy protest in Poland, and later she created Institute for Democracy in Eastern Europe in the United States. And Irena, with Eric Chenoweth, helped a lot democratic movements in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Romania, in Belarus, Ukraine, Lithuania, everywhere. And we have here Natalia Kaliada from Belarus Free Theater. Natalia is based in London, and Natalia is doing a fantastic job, and with her husband Nikolai Khalezin on promoting modern Belarus culture and on presenting, not Lukashenko's Belarus, but the Belarus which is trying to survive all this pressure and repression of the post-Soviet regime. And I'd like to start the discussion with Natalia. Natalia knows, this creative part of Belarus protest more than anyone else. And here I would ask here, do you have hope, Natalia? What do you hope from this campaign particularly? And do you see any differences from all other and previous campaigns?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here, and probably very nice feeling in terms of what's happening in Belarus, but very difficult feeling as well, because all of us are expecting this coming Sunday, and especially when the whole company of Belarus Free Theater exists underground in Belarus for the last 15 years, and what is a coincidence, the company is 15 years this year, and it's 26 years of dictatorship. What the difference? It's beautiful to amazing to see a self-organization of people that we never saw before in Belarus, and it was necessary to have leaders to organize major protests. And here, when we started to get first arrests, people started to get self-organized. In terms of that beautiful moment of unity in terms of women, I would say it's not the first time in Belarus. It's happening for many years, and it's probably the only continuity in terms of fight for freedom in Belarus. Because if we take back to 1999 and we talk about wives of those people who'd been kidnapped and killed in Belarus and political prisoners, so it will be Irena Krasovskaya, Svetlana Zavatskaya, Tatiana Klimova, Ludmila Karpenko, and many others who've been traveling all over the world in order to stop political kidnappings and disappearances. And when we go into 2010, Belarus Free Theater has its show that is called Time of Women, what is very relevant now. And it talks about those women in KGB jail after 2010 election. And in terms of those who've been leading political work in order to release political prisoners after 2020, it was also women, including Irena Krasovskaya, Irina Bogdanova, and I was a part of that group as well. So currently I could say that this is that particular constanta that exists within 26 years, and it's great because those three women who now woke up Belarus, they only had 15 minutes to decide what to do. And they made that decision very quickly. And we know with Belarusian opposition, when we talk about one single united candidate from Belarusian opposition, it was always a struggle in order to come up with that idea, because lots of ambitions and egos been involved. And here we have three women who just want to bring the change. And for that, it was necessary for them to get together for 15 minutes. Beautiful moment, amazing moment. In terms of, you already mentioned, Franak, in terms of social media and Telegram channels, that didn't exist, and now it exists. When I talk to BBC Channel 4 and major outlets all over the world, they ask about this difference, and this is one of the main difference in Belarus now. because nobody cares in terms of official media, because it doesn't have any reputation. And we have those channels where people have news. But I think the major scary moment to observe, if you analyze the situation over the last 5 years, it is that moment that it's not longer about Belarusian independence on its own. It is about safety and security of Europe in general and democracy in general, because of Russian influence that is using Belarus as a testing ground, as a pilot moment for major cyber media tools and instruments that is distributed later for interference into democratic elections in the UK or the United States. And now we talk about this particular development, that we need to talk about safety and security of the whole region. And the West needs to understand that it's necessary to get rid of its root of the problem. And the root of the problem exists in Russia and in dictatorship in Belarus. And while it's there, there is no safety of democracy in Europe and other parts of the world. In terms of the role of artists, of course, like it will be great to remember those parallels when Czechoslovakia started its movement and changes with the strike of artists. Or if we talk about Poland, when students went to the protest when Elders by Mickiewicz been prohibited. And in terms of our role in Belarus, a month ago, our audience got in touch with us and they asked to start to perform live again, because the previous few years we've been performing online. And the request was done, and the explanation, justification by our audience from Belarus was very simple. They said, because there are so many arrests happened now, we need to recall your major images of your shows in order for us to stay in cells, in jails, in order to be inspired and feel protected by arts. And that particular moment, you understand why you exist as a theater. And also a beautiful moment of transformation of contemporary art. I mean, contemporary art that is done in 1920s of the last century by Paris School, where Sutin and Bakst belong. And that first unique momentum when we have a man who is now in jail, but he is the first person who was buying major contemporary art done by Belarusian artists the last century that became classics of the world. And he is buying that from Western collections in order to bring it back to Belarus, even though it was part of his collection. And suddenly one portrait of a simple woman becomes a symbol of resistance. And also together with our actress and together with Nikolai Halezin, that portrait was transformed into resistance. And that woman's portrait just had middle finger as a symbol of resistance. And that woman was put in a prison rope. But even in the prison rope, she was with a middle finger resisting the system. And that particular protest that took place last week when 63,000 people gathered, Eva in a prison rope and with her face appeared in a crowd. And it was a beautiful moment when our actors been met and they've been talking to people, and people have been saying, Eva, we're so happy you are free because it feels we are free. And that's never happened again in Belarus because people always been trying to hide their eyes from each other. And unfortunately, the only thing that continues to be the same as it was before, as I personally deal with targeted economic sanctions that let people out of jails in 2010. unfortunately, I could observe one particular thing. It is soft diplomacy that the West continues to use, and the West doesn't want to accept and to get change and be proactive in order to stop bloody crackdown in Belarus. But the West prefers for the bloody crackdown to happen in order then to be reactive. And soft diplomacy doesn't work with dictator. We know that for 26 years. Unfortunately, the world continues to ignore that fact.
Thank you, Natalia. And this is the question you raised about repressions, and perhaps here question goes to Vitis and you as well. So, do you see any chance to prevent violence, let's say on Sunday and Monday, both to all speakers? Is any option that this protest, this popular revolution, will be violentless? So. Vitis?
I did mention, thank you first of all for the invite and for wonderful intro, and I can only second what Natalia has said. In fact, I think that the best case scenario for Belarus would be something what happened in Armenia. So there is a probability of this, like the best case scenario, when we saw a lot of people going out to the streets and where the authorities didn't want to attack its own people, and that led to the change. But that's the best case scenario. Unfortunately, knowing and having seen Belarus, having been involved with Belarus for more than 15 years, I think that with Belarusian authorities, it's much more likely to have a more conservative reaction to the crowd. And we've seen that in 2006 with the 10th city, in 2010, like December 19, that the repressions might happen. It was happening already, and that was also something perhaps new compared to what we've witnessed before, kind of preventive arrests and massive repressions in June. I think with the calculation and expectation that that would fear off some of the people, some of the activists. But by now, despite the fact that the Belarusian authorities have, on one hand, falsifications, on the other hand, have the force and the repressions, I think that they were betting on fear, and that didn't work. They were betting on divide and rule with the opposition. That didn't work either. So despite things which they have in hands, that's not working out. And I mean, my biggest fear, of course, and that's the biggest probability, is that unfortunately on Sunday and later on, we'll see another wave of repressions. And that's the big question mark, how the people and especially the international community would react. I think we should have reacted much more fiercely during the first wave of the repressions, speaking much louder regarding the political prisoners. And though there were some hints to a probability of sanctions, I think that we should have been saying that louder, because we need it for the Belarusian authorities to see as a preventive tool to avoid the repressions. But I mean, the very, very high probability of the repressions is there, unfortunately, and I only wish that everyone is prepared for that, and that the organizers of the rallies and protests will have in mind all the non-violent discipline, avoiding that kind of provocations which we have witnessed in 2010, but that's a very hard task, and I hope that the international community is going to have eyes on Belarus. It was the case in June, July, but August is a season of vacation, so it's also a big question to the journalists like you and to the international experts like us to make sure that Belarus is in the radar, in the spot of the foreign policymakers.
I just read on Twitter yesterday a tweet by Andrei Sannikov, the former presidential candidate. He mentioned he invited all European leaders to come on the night of 9 August. And when European leaders will be on the square with the protesters, then Lukashenko will not use violence. What do you think about this idea? Vitis, you can start and others can join.
I do recall once we had the war in Georgia when the Lithuanian foreign minister went to Georgia, to the capital, to Tbilisi, expecting that the Russian troops would not bomb Tbilisi if there are EU politicians there. I fear that because of the COVID situation, the probability of the foreign policymakers and politicians traveling to Minsk is low. The other question is whether the Belarusian authorities would allow that. And from the what we've seen regarding the election observation missions, they want to keep these elections as low profile as possible.
Thank you, Vitis. So Irena, yes, Irena knows all the protests, all the revolutions that can happen in the region, and I think Irena is can advise us to advise Belarusians what to do. And is it possible to plan at all anything in such circumstances, Irena? One second.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so first of all, I am, I think, a little bit more optimistic in the sense that I think that to paraphrase Tolstoy, all of the dictators are the same, but all of the oppositions movements are different and they have their own character. About the what is happening today in Belarus is in a sense, it's reminiscent, and I would say maybe Serbia, just before Milosevic went down. Okay, Poland, but it was 40 years ago. But the character of what we are seeing now is very much also reminiscent of those spontaneous revolutions in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, not even speaking of the Lithuania and Estonia. And we are talking, about so many years ago that most of the people who are today on the streets in Belarus don't even know what I'm talking about. Now, as far as the international support, international community, I may be a little bit more skeptical. I don't call it this international community, but I would say that if somebody is signing letters, saying, yes, Belarus people are with you, I think that it makes sense. Go to Minsk. Go by train, go by plane, go by car, stay, not necessarily in Minsk. You can go to any other town when there will be elections, and do not give advices. You say, Irena will give advice. Irena, I think it's very good that nobody is giving you advice, because people at this time should witness, the international community should witness, and for advice is things that the last 2 months had shown that there is a community wisdom, or maybe in the plural, community wisdoms, among people who know, first of all, that standing out and having simple messages of honest elections, Lukashenko goes away, are very strong and the most efficient. And the idea now is to make sure that Lukashenko goes away and that people are able to witness and to document what happened with the elections. And I think that in spite of, as they say, they cannot arrest everybody. So I do hope that people in different places had already set up different structures, which will be able to document how the elections, where did they go, okay? What candidate really won, and that the day after the elections, on the 11th, on the 12th, this is where really people go on the street to demand that those elections be either supported if they are honest, or that they be rejected if there were the government was able to do something with it. But I also hope, in moments like that, let's hope on it that the middle apparatus, that the lowest and middle people in the KGB, police, repression apparatus, they will see this. I mean, all of them have mothers, fathers, children. Be open to accept them, but also, some of them may be provocateurs, but in these moments like that, the most important is to have the very wide front, and then after to see what to do with it.
Okay, thank you, Irena. Here, let's move more to this ideological component of the protest and of Lukashenko's regime, and I think David can help us here, because basically we don't speak only about like this mechanics as we frame the discussion, but we also speak about the clash of ideologies and values somehow. And David, I know that you have like very a special opinion on this, but also about the current events. Can you share with us more? Oh, unmute yourself. Yeah, we hear you. We hear you. We hear you. Yes.
You can hear me now. Okay. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to join you, even though I'm so distant. And I've been following the events with great interest. And I would say two things at the outset, and I would agree with what's come before from the other speakers. I mean, the first thing is the size of the crowds. I've never seen such crowds before in any election in so many different cities, gathering almost spontaneously, even in remote spots. And crowds are very important for bringing change in any state. And you cannot, as we said, you cannot arrest everybody. And if the movement reaches a certain stage, I think it becomes unstoppable. The second thing is, and this is something that didn't happen in the 80s and 90s, is social media. Because the social media is not controlled by the government. And in fact, this government has shown total incapability in dealing with it, and how you deal with the ramifications of so many different ways of spreading information. And here, I think, is where Lukashenko's failed this time. Simply because of its scale, simply because of the size, and because the generation that's leading this protest is more or less the younger generation. There are some elderly people there, but mostly in these crowds, you see people under the age of 40 for the most part. And they're doing this during a pandemic. I mean, if you can take the pandemic as a factor, you would probably get multiplications of 5 or 10 on these crowds without that pandemic in the background. I mean, this is a scary pandemic. Almost 70,000 people have fallen sick in Belarus. In terms of ideology, if the three women, I think, are not espousing any clear ideology because they represent different backgrounds, different political campaigns. There's a host of difference between someone like Babarika with a banking background, Sapkala with a technological background, and Zikanovsky, who really is a popular blogger or vlogger, and then the three women. And I think one factor that was not taken into account by anybody was how Tsikhanovskaya has grown into this role as a leading protest candidate. If you saw her about 3 to 4 weeks ago, she looked like a neophyte. She wanted to pull out. She was scared for her kids. She had no real interest in taking power. You see something quite different today. She's confident, she's charismatic, and she can carry a crowd. And I think that is an important factor. If I could turn to Lukashenko, I think you're seeing now signs that he's, if not panicking, he's really scared. He definitely is afraid of what might happen. And dictators are unpredictable. They react in different ways to different situations. Do I run? Do I stay? Will I get arrested? How am I going to stay in power? And most of all, will these guys trust me? Will the KGB stay with me? Will the security people stay with me? Will the army stay with me in the long term? Because as Franak said, these are people with families. And the army, let's face it, it's conscripted army. They're young people as well, for the most part. They're seeing their friends go out on these demonstrations, and they're beginning to question whether it's the right thing to stand behind this president if he uses violence. So Lukashenko is facing a lot of problems. And maybe a little bit later on, I'll say what I think about Russia, because I don't want to get into that now. It would take too long. But I think the Russian factor is a very important one in a number of ways, as to what happens if there's a regime change in Belarus, how the Russians might react to it. But maybe I'll stop there for now, Franak.
Actually, no, actually, you can take this question. We have this question coming from Daniel Krusina, who's working in Belarus and work with many international organizations in Belarus, and he's asking the fair question. You know, what if the crackdown happens and protests getting out of control? Can we expect that Russian troops will come? So it's not enough just to gather crowds on the concert. You also need to have institutions behind your back. And Tikhanovskaya doesn't have this institution, as we understood. So, David, do you think this possibility of Russian troops or green men coming to Minsk is really high?
I would say probably not. I think the Russian government, or Vladimir Putin, has often hedged his bets in the past. I mean, even in 2010, there were signs that he was looking around and seeing whether other candidates might be worth supporting. Some of them actually approached Russia. And I think Putin probably is would have backed 2 or 3 candidates in this election if they'd all been allowed to run. It would not have mattered too much to Russia which of those candidates had won. But what is, I think, a concern to Russia now is the unpredictability of the future in Belarus if the regime changes, not knowing where it's going to go, whether it will go towards Europe, which would be a disaster for Russia. Putin has a number of ways to exert pressure on Belarus. First of all, economic, with energy prices, taxes on energy, exports, nuclear power station just about to open that's run and paid for by Russia. Security, joint military exercises, control of the border with Poland, and various unions in which Russia is leading, but Belarus is also technically at least a member, starting with the Russia-Belarus Union, the Eurasian Union, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, etc. Belarus is a member of all these organizations that are Russian-led. So where does this end? How would a new candidate, a new president, deal with Belarus's membership in these organizations? I think Putin will be concerned because Tikhanovskaya has already said she sees no future for the Russia-Belarus Union. That is certainly a first step. So it's unpredictable. Putin may be hoping, I think, though, like, say, Armenia as an example of an uprising that removed the president, but ultimately Armenia came more or less back to the Russian fold and away from the European Union's European partnership, for example. So I don't think Russia will make any dramatic moves. I think he will sit and watch for a while and see where the situation goes if there's a change of power. But that very word, that very phrase, change of power, is completely loaded. You know, how on earth are you going to have a change of power with the president if he's prepared to use force to stay in power, with all the agencies he's got behind him? And that, I think, is the difficult part here.
Yeah, a question to everyone, you know, about this Russia factor, because it's always common. Irena, did you feel that after Hungary and Prague, did you feel that Russia can come if the protests, like in Poland, pro-democracy protests will continue? And in general, you know, what's your take? Should we be scared of Russia? Can you? Yes.
Yeah, unmute. I would say that maybe Czechoslovakia was the last open entry of the army. Of course, we know cases where the Soviet army entered into Baku, into Tbilisi, but at that time the Soviet Union still existed. These were the last moments of a dying empire. If we have a danger now, it's mostly of the type that they used in Ukraine, either some mercenaries or some so-called green people. But I think that in order to be strong now, I mean, it seems that the people in Belarus now they feel that they are stronger than Lukashenko. And I think that they also feel that the Russian army will not come the way it came 50 years ago or somewhere. And I think that the most important is to make sure that the army which is in Belarus, composed of Belarusian, would really join the demonstrator if it comes to the moment that Lukashenko would like to turn the army against. I think that Russia is now in a very, very difficult situation. Economically, Russia is fighting to change its sanctions, to weaken the sanctions. It has some European allies who help it. And I think it's so obvious that if a Russian soldier in a Russian uniform crosses an international border, all of the efforts of the last 10, 15 years of Russia to be again admitted to the international family of nations will not work. So Russians like to threaten. They were threatening in Poland in 1980, 81, 89, and finally they never did it. I know they entered into Georgia. They took Crimea, but these are cases where they had to pay quite a big price about it. And okay, anything can happen in the head of Putin, but I don't think it would be the case now. And I think that the concentration of efforts now should be on the elections, assuming that people will even surround the voting places, the regional commission where it will be counted, and will not allow any shooting to happen. I mean, listen, even in Belarus, did we have seen any active shooting to the crowds? No, they beat up, and people seem now to be reacting very well to those beating. Okay, you beat me up, but Franak, maybe you tell us something. You were in the army. They were trying to break you in the army, and they didn't. And you are an example to other colleagues. Do you think that today they are better or worse, the young people who are drafted into the army?
You know, in the army there were two generations: those educated in Soviet Russian schools and academies, and those modern officers who made the whole career in Belarus, inside of Belarus. And their attitude to the country, to the motherland, is very different. You know, the younger ones, they don't associate themselves with Russia, but still, you know, army has this control center headquarters they have the joint force infrastructure, I would say, and we are reporting simultaneously about the enemies to the Belarus headquarters and to the Russian air defense headquarters. So unfortunately, you know, one thing it's ideology, and the other thing it's you know, this infrastructural dependence, which is extremely huge, as well as David mentioned before. Vitis, you wanted to join? Yeah, you wanted to jump in here.
Yes, what I'm saying here in Lithuania is that we are not able to get rid of Russia or Kremlin corrupt money in Europe, you know, and we want suddenly to get rid of Russia in Belarus. I don't think that, and I'm really upset when we are like going into this debate on the geopolitics. It's sort of a distraction, all this conspiracy theory that, you know, Kremlin is hiding behind some candidates and that they want to destabilize the country. Honestly, you know, what we know for sure, Lukashenko is guilty for this high dependence on Russia. It's his fault, and that's a fact. You know, meanwhile, we only speculate about the rest or how Russia might interfere. And I totally agree that most probably that's not going to be soldiers. They have a lot of other instruments to influence Belarus, even after the change. So why intervention? But also, let me say this, you know, like we know that like once we are speculating on the geopolitics, I think that we should be more focusing on freedom and democracy. And we know for a fact that Lukashenko is no freedom, no democracy. He's not going to change. And I think that denying even the possibility of this change for democracy and freedom, I think this is unacceptable on the behalf of the West.
Thank you, Vitis. Natalia, do you want to tell us something about this Russian card that Lukashenko is playing every election, basically?
I think it's what I mentioned before, and probably all of you are familiar with such the organization as iSense that works in Europe, even though the group is a Belarusian group. And it's very clearly followed up and very closely follow up what is happening over the last years in Belarus, including when Russians are buying the best internet platforms run by Belarusians. And it's very interesting that with Belarusian tolerance, that tolerated dictator for 26 years, Belarusians continue to use this non-violent resistance when they simply reject to sell out their platforms. And that way they're showing to Russia that they don't want to be even being sold out with their simple internet platforms, because Russians are buying those internet platforms in order to distribute propaganda stuff via those resources. And this is one of those major momentums when it's very important for us to have a very close eye on what's happening in terms of Russia influence on Belarus. But again, because me personally is located in London, and only 2 weeks ago, it was a Russian report released here in the UK in terms of Russian interference into Brexit elections. And for years and years and years, we repeat to the West and say that you must stop that in Russia. And Russia got developed because Lukashenko, I mean, it will be very high word for Lukashenko, but he kind of became a mentor for Putin. He made all those steps, what particular laws have to be put in place in order to implement major repressions against Russian people. And obviously, with major money that Putin has, it has become the most sophisticated regime that now is trying to undermine the whole democracy in the world, not only not to allow democracy comes to Belarus, because obviously for Putin, he doesn't need that democracy come to Belarus. What is interesting also, because I'm coming from the American government background, that Belarus, unfortunately, was always zone of stability for the West. And it was much more easier to keep dictator in power in order to control refugee crisis. And for Russia, it's also very important to have that zone of stability, because while dictator is in place, it's very clear what will be happening. And we need to change this vicious cycle of being zone of stability for Russia and for the West. I mean, Brzezinski played a big role in it as well, while giving us to Russia after the Soviet Union collapse, and Baltic countries given to the West after the Soviet Union collapse. So now we see the results of all of it, unfortunately. And we have two major refining, oil refining factories in Belarus. We have pipeline. So knowing that Lukashenko saw Putin a number of times this summer, what are those particular cards that are on the table, and what he might put in order for Putin to back him up? It's a huge question to discuss. Even appearance of Russian mercenaries last week in Belarus, it's under a very big question what exactly happened.
Thank you, Natalia. Let's open the floor to the audience and let's discuss. Please, anyone who wants to speak out, feel free to switch, play your screen. I'd like to invite Yaroslav Anders right now, who is with us. Yaroslav used to work the State Department for many years and big friend of Belarus, and also the big lover of Belarus literature. So Yaroslav, what's your take right now? You know Belarus very well, you know, from the US perspective.
Well, I always wanted to put things in a historical perspective, because someone said that the past is much easier to predict than the future. When you look at the situation in Belarus, the number of possible scenarios is almost endless. I wrote recently, yesterday, actually, I posted it on Facebook, a comparison to the situation that immediately preceded the rise of solidarity in Poland, the huge mobilization of people, the expectation, the new faces, new leaders that suddenly emerge overnight. And it is, on one hand, a hopeful comparison, because we know that solidarity eventually won, but it's also a cautionary one, because as we know, it took 9 years with ups and downs. And it also took, at the very end, you know, a small geopolitical opening. Geopolitics, unfortunately, is important in this case, and we have to remember about it. The opening that some smart people smartly used, probably without the lucky confluence of Reagan and Gorbachev. It would happen anyway, but it probably would happen differently, and it would likely take much longer. So we have to think in terms of strategies. I see it as the beginning of a process that may end up very quickly, but may take several years. You know, the process which is probably, I hope, unstoppable right now. But we have to be prepared for ups and downs and near disasters, as it was the case with solidarity. And by we, I mean, of course, people in Belarus, but more so even us in the West. You know, we have to be, as Natalia mentioned, proactive. We have to have strategies. We have to play this chess game a little bit smarter, I think, than we do. And the question is how to effect it, how to influence our leaders to be more proactive and more strategic in dealing with it. I think that's something very unusual. I mean, not unusual and perhaps not unprecedented, but very, very momentous is happening in Belarus right now. And the awareness of this fact is not yet infiltrating the thinking of our policymakers. That's my opinion and my feeling. It's, you know, in academics, in journalism perhaps, but it's not yet there. You know, I hope that my colleagues back at the State Department, when I left the State Department, I left a lot of brilliant people who understand these things very well. I'm sure they are working very hard. You know, I just hope and I wish them luck, you know, in bringing this to the right level of decision making. You know, and the Russian factor is important. The strategic moment, again, is unclear and can change overnight, but it's not particularly favorable the way I see it. Unfortunately, you know, the Russian element is unknown, but it's usually, you know, threatening. We've heard possible models like in Armenia, you know, when the basic fundamental interests of Russia are somehow secured, and they feel free to allow a little bit more leeway in internal affairs. You know, I once, you know, in one discussion mentioned, you know, the model of Finland, you know, in the 70s under the Cold War, you know. Unfortunately, you know, Belarus is also in a much more difficult situation from the point of view of Russian perception of what Belarus is, you know. Luckily for the Finns, you know, Russians never considered Finns a part of Russia, a part of their nation, you know, which is unfortunately not the case with Belarus. So I think we should mobilize as much as we can here in the West. And, you know, someone mentioned writing letters, petitions. I think letters should be directed also to our leaders, you know, to our decision makers, you know, and I hope something like that will happen quite soon now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarek, so much for joining. Does anyone want to react or to add or to continue what Jarek just mentioned?
I think I just add that it's very difficult time in terms of lobbying the governments, like talking like to Brussels, State Department, Congress, and London. As many of us already mentioned, it's summer break. So when we had December of 2010, it was Christmas break. So as we call it, like slipping of conscious, when nobody is paying attention. And the last 2 months, trying to appeal to governments to put targeted sanctions in order to threaten Lukashenko and his surrounding, everything been ending up with statements of concerns. And I think how to change that attitude and to explain that Lukashenko doesn't care in terms of any expression of concerns. And he only understands when it is very direct action and when his money is in danger, as Putin understands that, and when his surrounding also is in danger and all his assets is in danger. Otherwise, he doesn't understand any other languages.
If I may respond, just to explain the mechanics of the US policy right now. And of course, yes, it is very difficult to lobby governments anyway, but right now we are in a particular kind of sensitive moment because the nominee, the American nominee for the ambassador in Minsk, her hearings are scheduled for tomorrow. And usually in this period, you know, before actually the new ambassador presents her bona fides, is a moment kind of diplomatic silence, you know. So that may explain a little bit, you know, a reluctance of the State Department to speak more strongly about the situation when we have the ambassador and hopefully a fully staffed mission embassy in Minsk. Things probably will change a little bit, and there will be more opportunities for both lobbying the government and actually the mission doing something in Belarus.
Irena? Irena, no, we don't hear you.
Okay, we have very little time. Yes, do you hear me? Do you hear me? No, I don't hear you. Sorry, do you hear me? Say yes or no.
Yes, I hear.
Okay. Yes. We have very little time. It's Tuesday, I think, evening in Belarus, and the elections are on Sunday. I think I would this time play kind of, you know, open invitations by anybody. I mean, could be you, could be the candidates, to people who can come to Belarus. And to come maybe with their national signs, and I think not. I don't think the British would come, but from Poland, I think you could get a few dozen people from Lithuania, maybe from Latvia and Estonia, from Ukraine, and ask them, listen, come and help us. We will find you a place to stay. I mean, they can be in tents, but we want you to come because we need international witnesses. We mentioned today about the 2008 trip to, I mean, going to Tbilisi. It was organized by the late president of Poland, Lech Kaczynski. And I think it was a different situation, but I think he saved the Georgian independence by going there. I don't think that KGB, Belarus KGB, Russian KGB are going to behave the same way if they see groups, even small groups of people with, let's say, national flags or something. Remember, a few days ago, the Poles made a huge appeal, which I think didn't have much meaning, except that, yes, we are supporting you. You should answer them and say, yes, guys, we like you. Come, send Walesa, you know, he has nothing else to do. Or send some of his 7 children. And I'm really serious. Few dozen people from other countries, or maybe you should also appeal to embassies, to foreign students, say, come, we will surround you to support you, to give you some security, but please come, we don't want to be alone. And it's true, nobody will fly now with the COVID, but you already have some people, have some addresses, Franak, in Lublin, for example. Get in touch with Lublin, ask whether they can come by bus with a Polish flag. I'm talking of the Polish flag or Lithuanian flag because this would show the KGB that these are not just the Belarus citizens who belongs to them and whom they can beat up and put in jail.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Well, first of all, it's more difficult for some people to go than for others. I mean, I personally can't get out of my province right now, let alone travel abroad. But there are so many embassies already in Belarus that are quite active, including the British, which was mentioned. American, obviously not full staffed yet, but certainly most of the Europeans have an embassy there. And so the EU has an office in Minsk, which is quite active. I mean, all these people should definitely be attending on August the 9th. And I think even if governments just put in requests, constant requests to be present as monitors, even at this late stage, and they get turned down, that's better than not asking at all, because at least it creates a groundswell of we asked and we were not allowed to go. Therefore, these elections are not free and fair. And I think there has to be that perception that in a fair election, this president, he would lose this election. I think it's quite clear. For the first time, I would not have said that in 2010 or 2006 or 2001 even. This year, he would lose a free and fair election, but he's trying to stay in power. And I think that's a salient fact, that there is a groundswell now that wants to put forward a change in Belarus and to see this president out of power, peacefully if possible. I think that would be the ideal scenario. I also thought about, the idea of dictators fearing to step down because of what will happen to them. Not only dictators, I remember when Boris Yeltsin gave way to Vladimir Putin in Russia, he secured his safety thereafter, right? There'd be no inquiry into anything that he'd done during his government. And this was agreed to by Putin, and that worked quite well. Yeltsin lived another, I don't know how many years, quite a few years after that anyway. 2006, I think he died. And it might work in this case too. But if Lukashenko steps down, he's not going to be put on trial or shot or anything like that. He could go wherever he wants. Maybe not stay in the country, but he can go where he wants. And I think that may be one way out for him, because you have to think how he's imagining this situation might develop, and he's in fear of his own safety. And as was mentioned earlier, quite correctly, his own financial resources, of which he's got a massive amount. So this is why dictators, they are difficult to remove, but they all get removed sooner or later. And this, I think, is the optimistic scenario that was mentioned earlier. I'm reasonably optimistic. I don't think it will take 9 years, but I think it could, as Yaroslav said, it could take quite a few months, perhaps even a year, before you see the final changes taking place. I think it will take place faster than it did in Poland because of the modern resources at hand. The social media, the changes, the internet, all these connections, which can bring about change much faster than before. But I think it can happen.
Thank you, David. I wanted to invite, I lost him somewhere. Sergei Polivikov is here with us. Sergei is a representative of this new generation of Belarusians. He's the owner of the popular startup. I think it's based in the US, the startup, Well AI. And Sergei had a question in the chat. Sergei, can you introduce yourself and ask your question? Oh, I can unmute your. Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
No, thanks, Franak. I appreciate it. I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to thank everybody on this panel especially with Franak, you mentioned sort of new generation. I'm actually, getting older, but in terms of, media coverage and the media sources that the young people in Belarus and around the world are using right now, I think, Franak, you're definitely in a much better position to talk about it. So especially appreciate your various channels that you're supporting and updating, several times per day, especially Twitter. You have big following. So that's really great stuff, really important for Belarus people. In terms of coverage, I just want to make one remark in terms of crowds attending this unbelievable events. So I think in terms of crowds, there may be similar sizes in the past. Like I remember, 2001, there were a lot of crowds just because of the influence of the union leaders, because, as you remember, Hanchari came from this union movement, and there were a lot of sort of people already there ready to go to the streets. Here it's different because it's basically grassroots. There was no preparation, nothing. So it's just by itself, it's amazing. So, thank you for all the coverage. So again, I don't want to take too much time. So thanks for bringing me to the conversation. I don't want to sort of be, center of attention. But one question I had that I put in the chat, but let me just voice it here for everybody, and perhaps to Franak, because he's closer to the ground level there in Minsk. My understanding, for big changes, people who are part of the government, such as army and police, at least part of them have to be with the people, and therefore there is a saying, police with the people, right? So my question for everybody for this particular week, because we're in a very important week in the history of the country, what are the chances, what are your feelings that this will happen, maybe not on Sunday, but on Monday, maybe following weeks, that some of the people recognizing that on the other side of the barricades, there are no barricades, obviously, but people who want this freedom desperately for so many years, especially new generation, what are the chances that the army and the police, some of them will go to the side of the people? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. I can just begin, but I'd love to hear from everyone. So from my personal feeling, it's not enough right now to have great concerts in order to have thousands of policemen to kneel in front of protesters. So we see like two parallel narratives, two parallel realities. And what is like heroic and very cool for us, the 60,000 people at Bangalore Square, doesn't mean anything at all to the policemen and products of the system, who are there. From my personal feeling, same time, I don't feel any feeling anything about the split in the elites. I don't see that officials or ministers are going to switch the sides. Yes, we see the massive support of the changes and of the Tikhanovskaya's team, but we don't really see any even any signs that people in Ministry of Internal Affairs or MFA ready to flip. So that's my personal feeling, and this makes me very worried about the consequences. But I'd like to hear from everyone. Vitis, Natalia, Yarek, and David.
I think I'm trying to give maybe a few small examples in terms of previous experiences in Belarus, and it was connected to police. When on the 19th of December, when I was arrested, and that particular experience going in a police paddy wagon, threatened to be raped, brought to jail, and in jail there were dogs, like it was from my kind of weird child memories when I saw films about Nazi time, when on on metal chains there were dogs, shepherd dogs just barking at you, and at that particular moment staying for 20 hours stretched facing the wall with hands back, and riot police coming to you, beating you up when you start to slide over the wall. And they will tell, you know what, when you come to power, we will be still here. So nothing will be changed. Maybe the top will be changed, but we will be here. That was, I think, the one of the most scary phrase for me personally. But then I'll give you a positive example. When I was arrested during human chains that beautifully re-emerged this summer, and that particular time it was against kidnappings and murders in Belarus. And when I got arrested and was taken to the van by 4 huge riot police guys, and in that particular van, I gave them a lecture that they can't serve a dictator who killed Minister of Internal Affairs, Yuri Zakharenko. And it was a very interesting development. They kept me for about 4 or 5 hours trying to write those protocols. And when I got out of the police unit, those 4 guys been waiting outside, and it was already 4 or 5 a.m. at the morning. And they said, we are so sorry what we did. Could we take you home because it's already late night? And we will change our job because we thought that it was just our job to serve. So I don't believe that it will be that major shift of law enforcement in Belarus. There is no hope that it will be such a positive development that I only had once in my lifetime. But there is a possibility of sabotage when police might think whether to attack or not to attack. But again, observing that full police violence, like a large major scale, when it's not possible to recognize faces of our friends who end up in hospitals over the last few months, you think that it is a tiny chance. But as Irena said, that we need to appeal to the world, but we also need to continue to appeal to law enforcement, or maybe even to appeal to their parents and keep pushing that idea that they are children of those parents, and parents need to feel guilty for those children to be raised like that, and they must be responsible for that.
May I say something?
Sure.
I think that, you know, it's usually enough for the dictator or the powers that be not to be 100% certain about their own silovie departments, you know, the military and the police and the security, to think twice at least. So if this situation arises in a peaceful manner, that would probably add much more to the strength of the opposition. I'm not sure whether flipping the siloviki totally 100% is realistic in Belarus. If it's not 100% flip, it creates its own dangers, because then you have different police units and different army units sometimes pitched against each other, as we saw in Russia in 91, which may lead to bloodshed. I think that the best scenario, the best method strategy would be to work very hard on developing some kind of mechanism of transition, which I think is right now absent in Belarus, that would allow both sides somehow to come together. I wrote in my post that Lukashenko seems to be organically unable to do something like that. He would know how to sit at the same table with the opposition, but there may be other people in the government. There may be other people who would be able to persuade him that this situation is untenable and has to be somehow resolved in a negotiated manner. I don't know whether such people exist, you know, in the government. It's a question to Franak and Belarusian colleagues, you know, if there are some contacts and there are some attempts to establish some dialogue, but I think that that would be the only the only feasible, realistic move forward, in the situation.
Let me ask Tatiana Kulakevich to join our discussion. She's professor of University of South Florida, and she's often writing great pieces for Washington Post for the monkey cage section. So perhaps Tatiana can take both, this possibility of the flip, but also this big enterprises used as the voting force these preliminary elections.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you for unmuting me, and I'm happy to join. And I know many faces, and nice to see you guys. I wrote something that's coming out very soon, and you will read my take on everything. Well, my take is more kind of pessimistic, more in line with Vitis's. Basically my question right now is, at night today, United States time, morning in Belarus, my friends specifically texted me and told me that their friends told them that parents and friends at Savushkin product in English, were forced to go, in an organized manner. I guess they were gathered together and taken to the polls, and they have already voted. It was done under threat of losing the job. And even though they were dissatisfied and, didn't have positive emotions about that, they did go and they already voted there. So that's kind of, what do you think about that? And on the point of what will happen, I think that despite people saying that Lukashenko fears the protests, I think he is more strategic, doing the strategic job by canceling the concert. I mean, not kind of canceling, kind of, smarting the opposition by scheduling new concerts organized by the government, in a sense that he doesn't have to, he wants to suppress, he wants to eliminate the chances that people will go outside and protest, because he cannot afford to do too much crackdown, because the West will respond. And right now is basically the thing is how much the relationship with the West will deteriorate. So he wants it to get through the process with minimal losses. But the crackdown will happen. We know that, the arrests show that already. And he changed the government. That's my take. I'm sorry about being pessimistic on that. I am trying to be optimistic, but I'm trying to stay on the objective side as well. So please, what do you think about preliminary voting that already happened, even though people are dissatisfied and come out and protest? But the reality is the reality. Thank you so much, everybody, for unmuting me again.
Thank you, Tatiana. Anyone wants to take this? Vitis?
Yeah, well, the question is, if we talk about this Wagner's army and Putin and Lukashenko tensions, and one thing, and we've heard this in this discussion, is as well this perception as if Lukashenko is a guarantee to the Belarusian sovereignty. And, this is totally misleading thing. Belarus became a hostage of his personal power. And looking from that perspective, that who else if not Lukashenko, and the alternative is something unpredictable that we don't know of. I think this is a very bad thing, and what Lukashenko wants us to think. And realistically speaking, for Putin, change in Belarus is actually much worse than protests in Khabarovsk. He doesn't want to see change, because that kind of signal of change from Belarus might trigger Russians as well, and Putin doesn't want to see that. So that's one. When we talk about the numbers, I think that there's a book that about nonviolent struggle, that it's a very dangerous game, and in theory, 2-3% of the population out in the streets means change, you know, and then you can do the math. We are talking about a few hundred of thousands of people going out to the streets, and that's the question for Belarusians and those who want change. If Belarusians have the numbers, I think that the probability of the change is rising, and that's not gonna be easy, certainly. There's gonna be a lot of unpredictability, and that's another question. You know, someone asked the question about so what would be the next steps, and I think that the alternative candidates said that the elections, the next round of the elections would be that kind of change. There's no ideology, no programs. I think bringing back and building up the institutions, and first of all, I think the parliament would be something of the strategic interest, because if we are talking about one person, the president, I think this is a very dangerous game. But restoring the parliament, because currently the parliament is, it's basically, I'm sorry to say that, Belarusians, it's a joke, right? It doesn't represent the people, and we know from the crowds that we see that these are like very diverse groups of people, grassroots, you know, people from the cultural sphere, people who are from the entrepreneurship, from the IT sector, you name it. And I think this needs to be represented, and it cannot be represented by simply one person. The presidential race is kind of a trigger for change, and the fundamental question, how like the Belarusians are going to react, and the international community, would it be solidarity with the in solidarity with the people who want change, or would be concerned about geopolitical unpredictability?
David was first.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Tatiana. It's very nice to see you. It's been too long. I would say that, you know, probably there's a different way of looking at these things, as Vitas suggested. And one is to look at the traditional type of presidential election, which Lukashenko controls very well, through the CEC, through getting factory people to go out in advance and vote, etc. He cannot lose that way. But this is just simply, I think, one particular stage in a process of political change that may come about. I mean, another level is the street level, which we've seen a lot of recently, and that certainly wants change. So by controlling one, but not controlling the other, I think you have a problem for a sitting president. And there's also a time factor. He's been there 26 years. He's not going to convince the population that anything is going to change. If anything, it's going to get worse, because he's no longer got this ideal relationship with Russia whereby he could get cheap energy resources, refine the oil or whatever, and resell it and make huge profits. Those days are gone. So I don't think he's got much to offer anymore. So whatever happens next Sunday will not define the future of Belarus. Yeah, he may come out and he may say, I've got 70, 80% of the vote, everybody can go home and we'll all live a peaceful life again. I don't think those days are going to come back. I think you've reached a stage where something is going to give in the way that society is structured. It's not organized, it's not stable. And in short, the contract between the president and the people no longer exists. And that is a serious problem. And I don't know when it started. I've been trying to say to myself, you know, where did this come from? Did it come from the parasite laws of 2017? Certainly, the lack of attention to the pandemic is another factor, maybe a big factor, the economic downturn or whatever. But the fact is that the agencies of control by the president over society to keep it passive no longer exist. And I agree that in terms of little steps like winning votes forcing people to vote or they get fired or whatever, it might still work at a certain level. But in the longer term, it won't work. And I think the question is, how long is that longer term going to be? And that's probably why we're all sitting here and trying to reach a conclusion. I'm not sure we can actually reach one right now, but I certainly think things are changing, if not at the speed some people would want.
Thank you, David. I think we have to wrap up. I'd like Irena to comment. Yes, shortly.
Unmute. Very interesting discussion, but part of it should have been really taking place maybe 6 months ago, and a big part of our discussion should take place next Tuesday. Because today I think there are priorities. The priorities are the elections, and what Jarek Anders wrote in his Facebook, and then I think he was quoting Agnieszka Romaszewska from Belgrade, that people saw each other and now they counted each other. To say it even ironically in a Marxist term, quantity moved into quality, meaning people who thought they were in minority, like maybe you, maybe the older colleagues from the Popular Front, now you see that you are a majority. We will analyze it for many years, why, how it happened, but now it is the most important, mobilize for the elections, monitor what is happening, and then on Monday, let's move to the next step, depending on what will happen before the elections. And I think that we all can wish as much luck as possible, and strength, courage, and be smart. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Irena. So let me summarize. We had a great discussion. We agreed to have another discussion next week, as I understood. So we have to appoint, and we have to check ourselves, and also to, as David mentioned before, definitely August 9th. That's not the end. That's definitely the beginning. We don't know the beginning of what for sure yet. But something will go into something will happen for sure, and Belarus will never be as it was before. Lukashenko's regime will definitely change. Let's monitor. Let's follow it closely. Let me thank again to all our distinguished speakers today: David Marpels, Natalia, Kaliada, Irena, Lasota, Vitis Yurkonis, to everyone who contributed, including Tatiana Kulakevich. Galina Kashevska, unfortunately, didn't have time to ask the question. Also, I saw many great people on our chat. Anais Marin, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Alexander Shikorsky present. That was really great, very useful. The event was organized by Digital Communication Network, which I'm part of, DCN, Southeast Europe Hub, with the support of World Learning and the US State Department Office of Educational and Cultural Exchanges. And let's stay in touch on social media everywhere. And that's very cool to see Belarus on the radar again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.